So you have Noam Chomsky, who's this absolute giant of the intellectual left, a man who built his career critiquing power. And then you have Jeffrey Epstein, a powerful predator who used his influence to abuse people. Now, when new documents dropped revealing a deep, personal friendship between them, well, the story got a whole lot more complicated and honestly way more disturbing than anyone really thought. Let's try to make sense of it.
And it really all comes down to this one quote. This is reportedly Noam Chomsky's advice to Jeffrey Epstein back in 2019 on how to handle sex trafficking allegations. It is a jaw-dropping thing to read, and it just opens up a flood of questions, starting with a really simple one. How on earth did we even get to this point? All right, let's just lay out the two people at the heart of this. You've got Noam Chomsky, a guy whose entire life's work was about holding powerful people and institutions accountable. And then you've got Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sexual predator. So the big question is, how did these two ever even end up in the same orbit? I mean, you really can't get two people who are more different on paper. On one side, you have the public intellectual, the guy who's often called the moral conscience of the American left. And on the other, you have a convicted predator who became this symbol of just total elite depravity. You would think their worlds should never, ever have crossed paths, let alone become a real close friendship. So, for a long time, Chomsky claimed their relationship was, limited, maybe a little professional. But a huge trove of documents that just recently came out tells a totally different story. It paints a picture of a deep, comfortable, and pretty long-running personal connection. And when you look at how they actually talk to each other, it was not formal at all. In 2016, Epstein invites Chomsky to New York or the Caribbean, and this is Chomsky's reply. Now look, there's no proof he knew what was happening on that island, but the casual way he says he's fantasizing about it, it just shows a level of comfort and familiarity that is pretty startling. And this wasn't just a private thing between the two of them, it bled into other parts of their lives. Here, Chomsky's wife, Valeria, is writing to Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's former strategist, to try and set up a meeting. And how's she making the introduction? Through their very dear friend, Jeffrey Epstein. This friendship was being used as a social, even a political bridge. The emails are just full of these personal little details. You've got Epstein offering up his apartments in New York and New Mexico. You've got Chomsky thanking him for sending care packages. There were plans for them to have dinner with the Allens, which everyone assumes means Woody Allen. There was even this weird, playful little exchange where Epstein calls them Pluto and its moon, and Chomsky writes back, "Who's Pluto?" This is just not what a professional relationship looks like. This is a close friendship, plain and simple. Which brings us right back to that quote that kind of kicked this whole thing off. It's February 2019. Epstein is facing a media firestorm over sex trafficking allegations, so he asks Chomsky for advice. And Chomsky's reported counsel was to just ignore it, calling the whole thing part of a hysteria about abuse of women. So, faced with all of this, what does Chomsky himself have to say? Over the years, he's actually offered a few different explanations for his relationship with Epstein, both before and after these new documents came out. At first, Chomsky's story was all about money. He was really clear, saying Epstein never gave him any money. He said he just needed help with a technical matter, moving around $270,000 of his own funds after his first wife died. He basically described it as a simple transfer from one of his accounts to another. Okay, but what about hanging out with Epstein after he was convicted in 2008 for soliciting a minor? Chomsky's argument, which he made just last year, is that Epstein did his time. He said that under prevailing norms, once someone serves their sentence, they get to re-enter society. And for him, that was enough to justify their continued friendship. And then there's his broadest defense, which is kind of his catch-all. Chomsky basically argues, hey, I meet with controversial people all the time, even major war criminals, as a matter of principle. So in his mind, meeting with Jeffrey Epstein was really no different than meeting with any other powerful and, morally bankrupt person. Well, as you can probably imagine, a lot of people were not buying these explanations. The backlash to these new documents was immediate and it was harsh, especially from the people you'd think would be in his corner, his own collaborators, allies, and his biggest fans. And maybe the sharpest criticism came from Vijay Prashad, a man who co-wrote 2 books with Chomsky. He did not pull any punches. He said he was heartsick and disgusted, and that in his view, there is simply no defense for it. I mean, this isn't some critic from the other side. This is a close intellectual partner, and you can just feel the sense of betrayal. And that feeling of betrayal just cascaded down to his most loyal followers. Over on the Chomsky subreddit, which is a place for people who are really into his work, the mood was kind of summed up by this one simple gut punch of a post. This just really sucks. That's the sound of people being completely disillusioned. And this user, Slice of Peer, really gets to the heart of why so many people are hurt. Chomsky's entire career was built on applying this incredibly tough moral standard to powerful people and countries. So the question everyone is asking is, did he ever turn that same moral compass on himself, on his own personal life? This quote from another user really captures the raw emotion of it all, that feeling of a fan trying to deal with a fallen hero. You can feel the heartbreak, the anger, and just this reluctant acceptance. For so many of his followers, this isn't some academic debate. It's a really personal, painful disappointment. So where does all this leave us? What does this actually mean for the legacy of one of the most influential thinkers of our time? It seems pretty clear that these revelations have left a deep and maybe even permanent stain. Because this is the fundamental problem, right? You have this public life spent calling out the moral failures of the powerful. But then you have a private life spent giving friendship, support, and even media advice to one of the worst of them. It's just a stark reminder that even our most rigorous public thinkers can have these massive blind spots, right where their principles should have been the sharpest. Ultimately, this whole story forces us to ask a really tough question that goes way beyond just Noam Chomsky. His work on power, on the media, on injustice, it's still incredibly influential. But can we, or even should we, separate those powerful ideas from the really flawed actions of the person who came up with them? And that's the question we're all left to wrestle with.